Hello everyone, Kanasa here, and welcome back to Kerbal Gets Real, the next Millenia. It's going to be a bit of a longer episode today, coming in at about 30 minutes rather than the usual 20 to 24 that I go for, just because there was quite a lot that I did want to fit into this episode. Anyway, enough about that. What we are going to be launching to begin with is going to be nigh on identical to a mission that we launched last week. Last week, we sent a rover over to Saturn, testing out the Harper Advanced Nuclear Transfer Stage. This week, however, we are going to be going to Jupiter because there is a Galilean moon that I have never landed on, and that is Io. So this is going to be the Io rover. So we have Io in our sights, and hopefully we should be able to get that over once again using the Advanced Nuclear Transfer Stage, using the NVGE atomic rocket motor, which is a very, very, very nice engine with about 800 kilonewtons of thrust in vacuum, a specific impulse of about 1,600 seconds. It is ludicrously good, and it is going to be more than capable of getting this rover over and encountering Io. There we go, we have lit up that engine, and this is about a 12 or so minute burn, which is quite long, but really nowhere near as long as you would expect with an NCR. Yes, this thing is insanely powerful, considering we do have to perform a burn of about 8,000 meters per second to actually get our encounter with Jupiter. It's only going to take us 2 years and 250 days to get over there, so we are going quite quickly to Jupiter, which will be very nice. Means I don't have to worry about this being in orbit forever, and I can get to Jupiter, well, rather quickly. You can see we have now got our encounter to Jupiter, and what I'm going to do is I am going to plot out a maneuver, well, a series of maneuvers once I arrive that will hopefully get me a nice encounter with Io, and one that means I can capture around that moon. Obviously, Io is relatively difficult to get to considering its proximity to Jupiter, but you can see we have now got an encounter and we are able to capture. And with the stage that I'm going to use for this, we'll have about 200 meters per second to spare, which is fantastic. So with that being done, now what I want to turn to is going to be a much bigger nuclear transfer stage. So I have tested this engine twice now, and it seems to be going pretty well. So I thought, rather than launch something on top of an Orpheus Heavy, which can take about 50 tons to low Earth orbit, let's do something a little bit bigger. So we are going to be launching an Olympus variant of this nuclear transfer stage. And yeah, so a 150-ton nuclear transfer stage in low Earth orbit. You can see from the readout on the right, this is going to have about 21,000 meters per second of delta V when it doesn't have a payload on top. Obviously, that's going to be a bit useless. We do want to send things to different places in the solar system, so we will have a payload. But I have done a little bit of the maths behind it, and I have worked out with an additional module on top, an additional section of liquid hydrogen, I am able to take 200 tons to Mars, capture at Mars using this tug, then send this tug back to Earth and capture in a nice low Earth orbit so that it can be refueled and used again. And that is going to be fantastic for building some very, very exciting stuff over at Mars. So with that being done, we are going to turn to the Lunar South Pole Outpost food supply module. This is going to be the first lot of food that we are going to be sending over to the Lunar South Pole Outpost. Once again, we are going to be launching this on top of an Orpheus Heavy. That is getting quite a lot of use in this episode. Usually this has been neglected and I just favor the Olympus, but no, today is the Orpheus Heavy's day. A weird thing about the Orpheus today though was, for some reason, Flight Manager for recoverable stages wasn't working, so I was unable to recover any of the spent boosters, which was a little bit of a shame. Hopefully something that I can rectify at some point soon. I don't know why it's not working, but we'll see what we can do about that. Anyway, we are sending food over to the Lunar South Pole Outpost, and food is the only thing that I need to resupply that base with. As we have water extractors on the surface, and as we're at the South Pole, we can extract a lot of water, and we can convert that to oxygen through electrolysis. So any supplies for astronauts are going to be created in situ, which is going to be fantastic. Food is the only issue though, and that is why we are sending this module down. This module can give enough food for 4 astronauts for about 2 years on the surface of the moon, which is going to be wonderful. Don't want to be sending supply modules over every other week. That would get very tedious and very boring very quickly, so it's nice to be able to send a bulk amount all at once. However, that being said, I do eventually want to have a lot of crew on the South Pole outpost, so I am probably going to make a variant that utilizes an Olympus later on in this series. I've not done that yet, but if I want, say, 20 astronauts on the surface, well, I'm going to need to be able to take down a lot of food all in one go. But we have landed this food supply module. What we're going to do now is just connect it up to the Lunar Outpost Tortoise tank and drive it over. I did pick a rather questionable docking port to connect this to for this time. It was very tight. I don't know why I went for this, but I thought, you know what, the module might look all right there, so that's why we have gone for this, and probably really wasn't a smart idea. Oh well, I know for future that maybe we don't go for these tight little docks. Anyway, one thing as well, the infrastructure that I've got in place to dock things together at the outpost at the moment, it's pretty poor. And well, if you saw the last episode, we ended up using the tank to ram things together rather than its dedicated function of the docking port on the back. So I think that's something I need to bear in mind and maybe come up with a better design to get these modules together. So with that being done, it is now time on the 12th of January 2005 to turn to Lunar 3 ATM, which is the automated test mission. This is going to be, hopefully, the vehicle that sends my first lot of crew down to the surface of the moon in this series. What this is, though, is a completely uncrewed test mission. And the reason why I want to do this is this way, well, my crew are never in any danger, and no matter what some people may say, I do quite like to keep my Kerbals alive in these series. Yeah, there have been a few unfortunate incidents in other episodes and, say, other series, but no, I want to keep as many people alive as possible, so that's why I do all of these automated test missions, just to make sure that everything works as it should do. And then once I am safe in the knowledge that I can do this mission with a complete success, or mostly successful mission, that's when we strap 4 unfortunate souls into this and then try and send those over. So we have managed to get the main section of this mission on its way to orbit. Now what we're going to do is we are going to turn over to the Olympus booster and we're going to attempt to land this. Do a bit of a boost back burn because this is an Olympus Block 2, which has enough fuel in the bottom to perform a boost back burn, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to land as close to the Space Center as possible. Unfortunately, this time, I went a little bit too far to the east, and yeah, we are heading straight for the Fens, which is a rather large, marshy, swampy area in the UK. And we are coming down right over the water. So this booster may get a little bit wet. And also, unfortunately, for some reason, the collider for the water was a little bit off, and somehow we managed to hit it even though we hadn't landed yet, which caused the entire booster to break apart. And yeah, we weren't able to reuse that one, unfortunately. But now what we're going to do is, of course, we are going to turn back to the main mission at hand. We are going to fire up the translunar injection stage of this, which is being provided by one ATCRE engine, or the ACRA, I'm not sure if that's how it should be said, provided by the CH4 Changing History mod. Problem with this engine, though, it doesn't have a plume, so we don't get to see that beautiful plume as we fire it up. Oh well. So we're going to go for a bit of transposition and docking now. Unfortunately, the decoupling on that stage is something else that I do need to do a little bit of work on, and I am going to add another set of RCS to this just to make translation a little bit easier. We did, unfortunately, lose a solar panel when we decoupled these stages, but that's not to worry. We do have 4, And I believe just a single solitary one of those solar panels will provide us enough power. So the fact that we lost one isn't the end of the world. We have redundancy, but it is a bit of a shame, and that is why I'm gonna mess around, fiddle around a little bit with the decoupling section settings on that decoupler. So hopefully we don't break things whilst we try and fit them all together. Anyway, we are now at the moon with these two pieces all connected. Once again, we are going to attempt to just capture into a nice low lunar orbit. So the last time I sent a test for a crewed mission over to the moon, it was successful. The lander was successful. It was the orbiter that didn't work due to the fact that the heat shield burnt up when I re-entered Earth's atmosphere. That's why I do these kind of tests, to make sure that things all work. However, when I tested the lander then, I just picked the closest landing site that I could find to when I got my orbit. This time, we are going to be attempting a targeted landing with this lander. Reason being, I want to land crew at the outpost. It seems a little bit silly having this massive lunar surface base and being unable to land crew. So this is another parameter for this mission's success. Can we get close to the lunar South Pole outpost and still land successfully and dock and rendezvous with the orbiter once we are done, and then get back home as well? Unfortunately, 50 meters from the ground, we run out of fuel, which is never, ever a good thing. Luckily though, the lander did land the right way up, so even though we had a little bit of a wonky landing, well, we are able to perform our ascent and attempt to rendezvous with the orbiter in low lunar orbit. This is another thing that I'm going to have to check and make sure. To be honest, my descent here was a little bit bad. It wasn't the best of descents, so I'm hoping with a little bit better flight profile, I may be able to land that with a little bit of fuel remaining. But at the same time, I am going to make a few slight edits to that just to give me maybe another 50 meters per second of delta V. And then that way I can be sure that we will be able to land successfully without bonking the ground a little bit too hard. But anyway, we are doing the ascent now. What I did is I waited for the orbiter to be directly above us. That way I could kind of see which way it was going. Then I use MechJeb's rendezvous planner. I don't make it automate this for me. What I do is I just check the relative inclination and try and get that as close to zero as possible. But there we go. We are now performing our orbital burn to insert ourselves into a nice orbit. And then hopefully, with a little bit of luck, we will be able to rendezvous with the orbiter. There we go. It was a very, very minuscule burn to actually get our rendezvous. And you can see we have a separation of only 0.0 kilometers. A rather nice separation, and there the orbiter has come into view. So I'm not going to dock these now, because there's no crew on either of them. As long as I know that I can rendezvous them, I know that I can dock them and I can transfer the crew across. So I decided against docking, and what I then did was just turned back to the orbiter, and we are going to fire up our trans-Earth injection and attempt to get back to Earth. So this was a little bit trickier than a normal TEI due to the fact that we were in a polar inclination and we weren't exactly facing the right way. So what I did was I burnt about 800 meters per second to get out of the moon's orbit, and then I made a slight correction burn on the way to Earth, and that way I was able to get my perigee at Earth at around 45 kilometers, which was more than sufficient using the descent mode on the Orion capsule that we are using to safely bring us down, pulling at max about 7 Gs of force. There we go. We are successful in that endeavor. Now we are coming down, the water's disappeared. It's always a bit bizarre when that happens, but the parachutes are going to open and we're going to safely get down to the surface. With that being done, it is time to come in, make a few slight edits to all of the sections on this so that when we send crew, well, none of the bad stuff that happened in the last mission will happen again. No, I am fixing everything that went wrong, and hopefully that means that the next mission that we send over to the moon, well, it will be completely successful. It will go without a hitch. before that happens, what we are going to be doing on the 16th of June 2005 is launching a new nuclear reactor over to the Lunar South Pole Outpost. Even though the original one that I sent over can produce 100 electric charge a second, well, that's not enough. That is not enough for all of the modules that I have on that base at the moment. It can run everything fine, but if I want to use some of the liquefiers and the electrolysis machines that I have got on the South Pole Outpost constantly, well, I need more power. And that is one thing as well. In this episode, I have been sending down additional modules that I have not shown. I've done that because it's all stuff that I have already shown in this series, and I thought just showing the exact same thing over and over again, like landing different radiators, landing another mining drill, all that kind of stuff, I feel like it's best if I just do that off camera. Although, let me know in the comments if you do want to see absolutely everything, or if you'd rather me do it this kind of way, where I just skip out all the stuff that's already been done and get on with the new exciting, all the stuff that's new. Anyway, once again, we are performing a boost back burn with this, and look how close we got to the Space Center this time. We are practically touching. However, even though I was very good at my targeted landing, well, the landing part left a little bit to be desired, and yeah, we come down a little bit too hard and break all of the engines. Oops, that could have gone a lot better. Landing these Olympus boosters this time has gone not very well, but I just wanted to show there that I was in between the squad monolith and the Space Center. That's how close to the Space Center I managed to get that landing. Anyway, we are now on our way over to the moon. We've got quite a high orbit when we come in, but we've got 2,500 meters per second of delta V on this lunar capture stage. So I didn't really need to have a very efficient capture. I could really mess around and just try and do whatever worked at the time, I guess, and this did work, but eventually I did use that stage to get us into a nice low lunar orbit. So one thing about this module, you may notice there are tank tracks on the side, and that's because I mentioned earlier that I wanted a better, an improved way of maneuvering modules around the base, and this was the concept idea. Basically, having tracks on the pieces that we maneuver. I never wanted to do this because I thought it would look a bit ugly. However, I thought, yeah, we might as well go for it if it makes things a lot easier. And make things easier it did. So this was so much easier to control and dock than the Lunar Outpost Tortoise tank ever was. And with this being said, with this being done, I am not gonna use this all the time, and the next mission that we will be launching actually is a vastly improved system to this that isn't going to rely on having wheels on every single module. It's going to be kind of like a cross between this and the Outpost tank. There you go. We can see with a little bit of jiggling around with the leg extensions, we are able to get that docked. Another thing that module had as well is a load of extra liquefiers, because I did notice that on the base, we weren't producing enough liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen compared to the amount of, well, just gaseous oxygen and hydrogen we were producing. So I wanted a few more of those, and then that way, well, we could just produce rocket fuel for days, and it would be fantastic. We've got a lot on there now. As I did mention, we are going to be launching a new way of maneuvering pieces on the base, and I've just called it the crane for now because I wasn't really feeling very inventive, and I just thought, yeah, it looks like a crane. The modular launch tower there is also going a little bit crazy. I'm not entirely sure what's causing that, but modular launch pads always they're a bit janky, they're a bit weird. There are cases where they can decide to dance around and smash your rocket as you're trying to launch, and in order to kind of resolve that, I put an extra pair of clamps on the launch tower. It looks a bit silly, but it kind of rectifies that problem. Anyway, this launch vehicle is slightly different because it's an Olympus. As we saw the Olympus logo down the side as we were just before we were about to launch this. However, it's just one stage. This is a single stage to orbit Olympus. It is the first stage of an Olympus, and that is capable of lifting 80 tons to low Earth orbit. in one go. I do have to turn the outer ring of engines off to prevent it from having a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 30 by the time it gets to orbit, but that's fine. As long as I can remember to do that, that's absolutely okay. Anyway, the payload fairing has been deployed, and we can see the new crane. So, this is essentially, I feel like it's more of a gantry system. I'm not sure if that's the right word of describing it, but what this is going to do, it's made pretty much entirely out of Infernal Robotics parts. So we can move this around to our heart's content. And it's got a docking port underneath the main section. And every single new module that I'm going to send, I'm going to put a docking port on top so that this can basically drive over the module. And then it can use the Infernal Robotics to basically maneuver itself into a position, connect to the module, then take that module up, drive it wherever it needs to be, and then dock it, hopefully, a lot more successfully than the Lunar Outpost Tortoise tank ever did. But we have made ourselves over to the moon, and there we go. We can see the parts are all moving now, getting ready to place them into a position ready for landing. This was a little bit of a pain because obviously it throws my center of mass around when I change these, which made landing this rather difficult and a little bit tricky. But eventually, as we can see, I did manage to come down nice and gently, very, very, very close to the Lunar South Pole outpost. About 100, 200 meters away maybe, with a little bit of fuel left to spare as well. But we're not going to be using that. We are, of course, going to be using the tank treads for everything. But there we go, we've touched down, and now all we need to do is ditch that descent stage, and we can maneuver this thing into a position where it is going to be useful. I do want to say, this thing, considering it is made up entirely of Infernal Robotics parts, it is Kraken bait. It is pure Kraken bait. It is so not fun. How much the Kraken likes this thing, it is ridiculous. But you can see I did land another section of a radiator to hopefully provide some cooling for the new nuclear reactor that we have on the base. What we're going to do is we are going to slide this over, clipping through those radiators ever so slightly. It's a little bit of a tight squeeze. That is the one direction that I can't extend this out, is in a sideways direction. I can't make it any wider, and maybe if I perhaps do a better design for this down the road, that is something that I will take into consideration. But you can see we are moving that section, the center section, down, so we are able to dock with the radiator and then lift it up from the surface of the moon. As I said, this thing is very, 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 very the Kraken really likes it. You can see the wheels, well, the tank treads and everything, they're really fighting against each other because this thing just, it shouldn't fit in there, but the game says, but it is fitting in there, but physics says no. I guess, I don't know, but yeah, it was really not very fun. But we were able to get closer, and I tell you what, this was a much, 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 much more enjoyable experience than using the Tortoise tank to ram things together. It was a lot easier to get done, and it took me a lot less time to get that radiator module all attached and then send this away. So I said this was Kraken bait, so I thought I'd show you some of the stuff that happened with it. Yes, I am so glad that I quick-saved quite a lot when I was using this, because otherwise I would have been incredibly upset. I lost the entire base at one point then. But that was that all done. Now what we're going to be doing is launching Lunar 5 on the 20th of November 2005. This is going to be our first crewed mission over to the moon. And on board, we have Hernan Cortez as a pilot, Evan David, and we have Phineas Masters and Boris Bogvadze as the engineers on board. So I have done, once again, I did say that I'm going to skip out missions that aren't really that crucial. I did send one of these up to low Earth orbit and just test that there was enough food supplies and all of that to ensure that a mission over to the moon would be okay. And it was. And that's why we are now in November. We skipped forward quite a bit of time since the last launch. There was also the fact that I forgot to train up my astronauts in the use of the Orion capsule, which is something that I didn't realize was now implemented into RP1. used to be able to get away with not training people for the Orion because it wasn't configured to the training section of RP1, but you have to do that now. So that took 300 days to get those all trained up. Really not very fun, and I was waiting around for a really long time, and that's kind of why in this episode I've just been sending loads of additional pieces to the Lunar South Pole outpost, because I thought, well, I've got some time to kill. What can I do? Just make the outpost as big and grand as possible. And one thing I do eventually want to do, that there's loads of new things that I want to send over. I want to send over some additional liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen storage, more electrolysis machines, because it would be great to be able to produce more oxygen and water. I've already sent over another drill, but maybe more drills, more radiator modules, more crew compartments, absolutely everything. We're going to make it so big, it's going to be so huge that I'm going to get a single frame per second whenever I visit it, which is, I mean, I'm getting about 5 frames per second now, as it is, which really isn't fun. But there we go, we can see we have made it up to orbit. I think we failed the boost back burn. I kind of got distracted by what I was talking about. And yeah, the separation once again was a little bit janky, but luckily no solar panels broke this time, and we were able to dock these 2 sections together before sending them on their merry way over to the moon. The crew are on their way. It's the first time that we've sent a crew outside of low Earth orbit in this save, which is, it's pretty nice, and I got a lot of funding for it because I broke loads of milestones whilst doing this. I did set the craft to be pointing backwards against the sun on its way over to the moon, just in case a solar storm came along, and that way we did have the fuel tank blocking the crew capsule from the sun, which is something you should do because solar storms are really deadly. Really deadly. They vamped them, they upped them not that long ago, and now, yeah, they kill crew dead in like a matter of like minutes, hours. So try and mitigate those as much as possible. But we have now moved all 4 of the crew over to the lander. Yeah, this was a little bit ambitious. I was thinking, do I send all 4 down, or do I send a couple down? Do I send 3 down? But you know, I thought, you know what, screw it, we're going, we're going in here. We are going to attempt to send all 4 down to the Lunar South Pole outpost at once. So they are going to the LSPO because I want the engineers to basically give it a rundown. They want to check and see and make sure that everything is running as it should be. Obviously, we've sent no crew there before, so they do need to make sure that everything is up and working. We can't trust those computers, those telemetry units that give us a readout. No, we need to see it with astronauts' eyes, with Kerbal eyes. They need to ensure that everything is as it should be. But there we go. We are now beginning our final stages of the descent of this lander. And one thing about this landing is my Delta V readouts were being a little bit weird. So it says I have 4,500 meters per second of Delta V on the Kerbal Engineer readout on the top left by the altimeter. Yeah, I do not have that much. That's enough to land on the moon and then get back into orbit, and that is only reading out the stage that we are landing with. So I was looking at that thinking, I've got plenty of fuel, I've got absolutely nothing to worry about. It didn't even cross my mind that that was a ludicrous amount for this stage. And well, we'll see what happens. we'll see what happens. So nothing bad goes wrong. Evan David, Phineas Masters, Hernan Cortez, and Boris Bogvardzy, they're in safe hands. They are definitely in safe hands, but you can see we are coming down very close. The target difference is only going to be about 100 meters, so we are going to land incredibly close to the Lunar South Pole outpost. There we go, it has now come into render range, so the game starts to lag considerably as we get this close to this behemoth of a lunar base. It's looking very large now, but yes, about 150 meters from the surface of the moon, we run out of fuel yet again. We bounced though, it bounced, so we didn't lose any crew, but we landed on the side. And that explosion wasn't anything crucial. That explosion was just the docking port on top. So what I'm thinking is potentially we might be able to use one of the devices, say the Lunar tank or the Lunar gantry, to try and right this to send the crew back up to the orbiter, or we send a rescue mission. I'm going to try one of the devices I've already got on the surface already, because I feel like that would be a really cool kind of thing to do. But that will come in the next episode, and I would just like to give a massive thank you to everyone who watches these videos and has subscribed to my channel. I just hit 5k, which has been awesome. I'd also like to give a big thanks to the continued support from all of my patrons. If you like this video, why not give it a like? If you've really enjoyed it and want to keep up with the content on my channel, please do consider subscribing. I have been Karnasa, and I will see you later.